really got people talking. Elon Musk, a gesture, and the ADL's response. It's been all over the news, social media's buzzing, there are statements flying around. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's amazing how one little gesture can turn into such a huge controversy. Especially when it comes from someone like Elon Musk, you know. He's got so much influence. This is about more than just like a hand movement. It gets into the whole idea of symbols and history and how people interpret things. It's fascinating, really.
Right, so to set the scene a bit, Elon Musk, he runs Tesla, he's in charge of Twitter. He's not exactly known for being quiet, is he? Anyway, during a recent speech, he made what some are calling a fascist salute. And well, I think a lot of us thought we'd left that kind of thing back in the history books.
Exactly. You don't see the fascist salute every day, do you? Or the Roman salute, as it's sometimes called. It's got a lot of baggage. You know, Nazi Germany, fascism, the whole dark history. So even if someone doesn't mean it that way, it still raises eyebrows, right? It's a sensitive thing. But what makes this even more interesting is that the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, actually defended Musk.
That's the thing I don't get. They're supposed to be fighting against bigotry and hate speech. You'd think they'd be the first ones to call out anything that even looks like a fascist symbol.
Right. But they put out a statement saying that they didn't think Musk meant it as a fascist salute. They pointed to his history of speaking out against anti-Semitism and his support for Jewish causes.
Okay. But here's the thing. The ADL has criticized other symbolic actions in the past, like they've argued against students wearing keffiyehs on college campuses. They said it could be seen as supporting terrorism. So defending Musk doing something with, well, let's be honest, a much clearer link to actual fascism seems like a double standard. Like, what's the line here? What are they using to decide what's okay and what's not?
It's tricky, isn't it? The ADL's always dealing with these really sensitive issues. Hate speech, symbols, politics, it's all kind of a minefield. So sometimes their decisions are going to be controversial. And in this case, defending Musk has really stirred things up.
Definitely. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. She came out swinging against Musk's gesture, and she was really critical of the ADL for defending him. She wasn't alone either. A bunch of other politicians and organizations jumped on board. They accused the ADL of hypocrisy, of protecting powerful people while ignoring other forms of bigotry. This is turning into a much bigger conversation, isn't it? Free speech, accountability, what organizations like the ADL should be doing. It's a big deal.
You're right. This one incident has become like a flashpoint. It's forcing us to ask where the line is between free speech and harmful speech, and who gets to decide where that line is. But before we go too far down that road, I think it's important to understand why this particular symbol is such a big deal. It's not just a random hand movement. It's tied to a really dark part of history, and that history still matters today.
Yeah, I agree. To really get why this is so controversial, we have to understand what's behind the gesture itself. So let's take a step back and talk about fascism. Why does it evoke such a strong reaction, and how does that historical baggage influence how we see this whole incident?
Good point, let's do that. Fascism, it's all about power, isn't it? Control. It's an ideology that feeds on fear. It wants to shut down anyone who disagrees, and it uses symbols really effectively to stir up emotions, to make its followers feel like they're all in it together, and to scare those who don't agree. The fascist salute, the way it looks, so aggressive, everyone doing it the same way, that was a big part of how the Nazis projected their power. They wanted to look strong, dominant.
So it wasn't just a salute, it was like a visual symbol of their whole ideology.
Exactly, and that's why it's so disturbing to see it pop up again, even if someone says they didn't mean it that way.
Especially for people who actually lived through those times, right? Who saw what fascism can do.
Absolutely. It brings back those memories, that trauma. And that leads us to how people reacted to Musk doing this. It's been a really divisive issue, as you can imagine.
Oh, I bet. Social media must have gone crazy.
Oh, yeah. Totally blew up.
Any particular trends you noticed, like in how people were responding?
Definitely. Hashtags like, hashtag Musk fascist salute and hashtag AD hypocrisy were trending for days. It was huge. Musk's supporters, they were quick to jump in and defend him. They said the gesture was taken out of context, that people were misinterpreting it. They talked about all the good things he's done, his charity work, how he's always said he's against anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I can see their point. It's easy to overreact sometimes, especially online.
Right. But on the other side, you had his critics. They saw this as a sign that he's either clueless or maybe even agrees with fascist ideas. They brought up his connections to some right-wing figures and how he sometimes says inflammatory stuff on Twitter. They said it's all part of a pattern.
It's almost like people are seeing what they want to see, depending on what they already think about Musk.
That's the problem with social media sometimes. It feeds our biases. We end up in these echo chambers where everyone agrees with us. And it makes it hard to have real conversations, a kind where you actually listen to other viewpoints.
Speaking of viewpoints, how did the news cover this? Were there any obvious biases in the way they presented the story?
The media coverage was all over the place, really.
Yeah.
Some outlets focused on the historical context, the ADL's defense of Musk, which a lot of people thought was strange. They really dug into the potential dangers of normalizing fascist symbols. They questioned Musk's motives and talked about the bigger picture of how we talk about politics.
It's like they were putting the gesture itself under a microscope, trying to figure out what it meant, what the impact could be.
Yeah, exactly. But then other outlets, they were more sympathetic to Musk. They emphasized how he said he didn't mean it in a fascist way. They talk about his record as an innovator, all the good things he's done for society. They said the whole thing was just a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion.
So it was more about Musk as a person rather than the symbol itself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a reminder that the media has a lot of power. They can influence how we see things. The way they frame a story, the words they choose, what they emphasize, it all makes a difference.
True. We might think we're getting objective news, but there's always an angle, right?
And in this case, it really showed how the media can either make something seem really serious or kind of brush it off. How they chose to portray Musk's gesture had a direct impact on how people viewed him, how bad they thought it was.
It's all connected, isn't it? The gesture, the ADL's response, the social media frenzy, the media coverage, it's all part of this bigger conversation we're having about symbols, about the responsibility of people with influence, and how we deal with these things in a world where information travels so fast. And something else we have to remember is that this isn't just an abstract debate for a lot of people. When we're talking about something like the fascist salute, it's not just about a gesture. It brings up real trauma, people's lived experiences, and for some, it brings up a very real fear that those ideologies are making a comeback.
It's like we're not just debating ideas, but people's identities, their lives, and that makes it a lot more intense, a lot more personal.
You're right. So it's important to approach these conversations carefully, to listen to people who have been directly affected by these ideologies.
I agree. But how do we balance that with free speech? Where's the line between letting people say what they want and stopping hate speech? Especially online, where anyone can say anything to millions of people. Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's something societies all over the world are struggling with right now. It's not easy to find the right balance.
And it seems like this whole incident has really brought that question to the forefront. Like, we're all trying to figure out the rules of the game in this new digital world.
And that struggle to figure out where free speech ends, it's not new. It's been going on for centuries. But social media has definitely made it more intense, more complicated, and way more urgent.
So what about the ADL? What do you think this means for their credibility in the long run? Can they bounce back from this, or has it hurt their reputation too much?
It's hard to say for sure. They've been a major voice against hate speech for a long time, and there's no doubt they've done a lot of good. But this has exposed some cracks, some internal disagreements.
Yeah.
It's made people question if they're really applying their principles consistently.
It seems like they've got some trust to rebuild. How do they do that? How do they convince people they're still committed to their mission?
They need to be more open, more transparent about how they make decisions. They need to talk to their critics, really listen to their concerns. They need to show that they're willing to learn from their mistakes and adapt. Because fighting hate speech online is a whole different ballgame.
This is a make or break moment for them, isn't it? How they handle this will determine what people think of them for years to come.
Absolutely. And even beyond the ADL, this whole thing has bigger implications.
Right.
It makes us think about power, about who's accountable, about how people in the public eye should behave in this digital age.
You're right. This isn't just about Elon Musk or the ADL. It's about how we as a society deal with these really tough questions about free speech, hate speech, and the power of symbols. Especially now when everything's online and everything moves so fast, it's a conversation we need to keep having, even if it's uncomfortable.
I couldn't agree more. If we want a world that's fairer, more just, we have to talk about these things. But we have to go deeper than just slogans and sound bites. We have to be willing to see the nuances, the complexities.
It's about realizing that there are different perspectives, different lived experiences. And if I want to find solutions, we have to listen to each other. Really listen, with empathy, with a genuine desire to understand.
Well said. And I think that's a good place to to start thinking about the bigger picture.
It feels like we've just dipped our toes into this whole thing. It's so complex. But as we wrap up, I keep coming back to one question. What does this mean for how we talk about politics going forward? Are we stuck in this cycle of outrage and division? Or is there a way to have more thoughtful conversations, even about topics that are sensitive, like this one?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's not an easy one. The stakes are so high. How we talk about these things, how we frame the debate, it matters. It really does. It shapes how people think, how they vote, their lives.
It's a huge responsibility. And it feels like the internet, social media, all of that, it's made things both better and worse. We have access to so much information now, but it's also so easy to spread misinformation. We get trapped in these echo chambers, and it's all about attacking the other side instead of actually talking.
You're absolutely right. Social media, it's a double-edged sword, for sure. It can be amazing for connecting people, sharing ideas, raising awareness. But it can also be used to spread hate, create division, silence people.
So how do we deal with that? How do we use technology for good, but avoid the bad stuff? How do we create spaces where people can have real conversations, where they can learn from each other? How do we hold people accountable without just shutting down anyone who says something we don't like?
Tough questions. And I wish I had all the answers. But I think education's a big part of it. We need to teach people how to think critically, how to separate fact from fiction, how to spot bias, how to engage with different viewpoints respectfully, even if you disagree.
Right. It's not about telling people what to think. It's about teaching them how to think for themselves. It's about being curious, questioning your own assumptions, and being willing to search for the truth, even if it's not what you expected.
Exactly. And that's not just something for school to worry about. It's something we all need to work on in our own lives. Paying attention to what we read, what we share, how we talk to people online.
It's like that every click, every comment, every post, it all adds up. We're all part of this giant experiment, and our choices have real consequences.
They do, which is why I think it's so important to focus on connecting with people, trying to understand where they're coming from, finding common ground, even when it's hard. We all live on this planet together. We all have a responsibility to make it a better place.
I like that. A better place. That's a good thing to aim for. Well, we're just about out of time. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Given everything we've discussed about symbols, public figures, free speech in the digital age, how can we have better conversations about these things? How can we move past the outrage, the knee-jerk reactions, the echo chambers? How can we talk to each other in a way that respects both individual freedom and the need to hold people accountable?
That's a great challenge. And remember, this isn't just about celebrities or politicians. It's about all of us. How we treat each other online, the conversations we have with our families and friends, how we react when someone says something we disagree with. We all have a part to play in shaping how we communicate.
So what will you do? How will you contribute to a more informed, more empathetic, more thoughtful public discourse? Tell us about it on social media, or just think about it on your own. The future of our conversations depends on it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep exploring.
Until next time.